It is a Thursday morning in February, and you are standing in your kitchen with the refrigerator door open, looking at $400 worth of groceries, and there is nothing in there to eat. Now go back with me. Same month, a farmhouse in eastern Iowa, 6:30 in the morning, still black outside, 12 degrees on the porch thermometer, and my mother has been up for an hour because the milking starts at 5 whether she is ready or not. There is a cast iron skillet on the stove that her mother handed her. There is a coffee can of bacon grease beside it with a spoon standing up in the middle of it. There is a crock of sauerkraut souring behind the cellar door, and 200 jars glowing on a shelf under the stairs, and a wooden bin of potatoes she dug in October that will not run out until April. That week, my mother fed 11 people, the 6 of us, my grandfather, and 3 hired men who came in off the yard at noon expecting to be fed like they were owed it because they were, and my father wrote what it cost in the ledger he kept in the kitchen drawer. $9.40, 11 people, 21 meals apiece. Nobody left that table hungry, and nobody got sick. And here is the part that ought to make you sit down. Better than half of what she did in that kitchen, you cannot legally do today, or you cannot legally buy today, or somebody spent 60 years and a great deal of money teaching your mother to be ashamed of it. She never wrote any of it down, not one card, not one recipe. It all lived in her head, and when she went, most of it went with her. Most of it, not all. I am Otis Granger. I am 64 years old, and I have spent 40 of those years picking through other people's barns and estate sales across the Midwest, which means I have stood in about 1,000 farm kitchens after the woman who ran them was gone. Same crocks, same jars, same skillet, same grease can, same cellar door, different name on the mailbox. I am not a chef and I am not a scientist. I am a man who grew up on the wrong side of that kitchen door watching, and who has spent the last 20 years finding out that damn near everything she did, the things we all quietly agreed were old-fashioned. The record now says she was right and the box was wrong. Now, before we count these down, 3 things I want you watching for. Number 16 is the one most of you are going to refuse to make, and I am going to tell you why they made it anyway, because the reason is better than the dish. Number 10 is the one you cannot legally buy across the state line in this country anymore, and I will name the year that door closed. And number 3 is a jar of water my mother sent out to the field in August that a company in Florida reinvented in 1965, patented, and sold back to us. But before any of that, I need you to hear the honest version, because I am not going to sell you a fairy tale about the good old days. Some of what my mother did was hard. Some of it was joyless. Some of it she did because she had no choice, and if you had handed her a chest freezer in 1958, she would have taken it and never looked back. And she did, and she never did look back. I am not telling you her life was better than yours. Parts of it were miserable. And 2 or 3 things on this list carry real risk if you do them wrong. Not pretend risk, real. When we get to those, I am going to stop the countdown and tell you exactly where the line is, and if you cannot stay on the right side of it, do not do it. I would rather lose your view than have you get somebody sick. That is the deal. Aggressive list, honest man reading it. One more thing. None of these disappeared because they stopped working. They disappeared because somebody made money the day you quit doing it yourself. That is not a conspiracy, folks. That is just a sales department. And they were very, very good at their jobs. If you want the rest of these kitchens pulled back out of the ground, 1 plate at a time, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for the next one. We are counting down from 25. Let's go. Number 25. Ham and beans in a pot that never came off the stove, a pound of navy beans picked over on the oilcloth for stones, soaked overnight in the same enamel pot her mother used, an onion, a ham bone out of the cellar with enough meat left on it to matter, on the back of the range at 7 in the morning, and it sat there humming while she did 2 loads of wash on a wringer machine. The ledger says navy beans ran about 8 cents a pound. Cornbread to go with it, another 3. She fed 11 people for supper on something like a dime, and there was enough left over to fry in grease the next morning. Then, in 1971, General Mills, up in Minneapolis, 4 hours from our back door, put Hamburger Helper on the shelf and spent the next 15 years running commercials that told women on television that stretching a meal from scratch was a thing you did because you had failed at something. The federal dietary guidance now puts beans and pulses at the center of the plate for heart disease and blood sugar. The USDA has been saying it plainly for years. A restaurant in Des Moines will sell you a bowl of white beans and ham with a sprig of something green on it for $18. Nobody outlawed a pot of beans. They just outspent it. That one they only marketed against. The next one they taught your mother to be embarrassed by. Number 24, skillet cornbread and the grease can it was born in. Buttermilk, cornmeal, 1 egg, salt, a spoonful of soda. The skillet went in the oven empty with a slick of bacon grease in the bottom and got screaming hot first. That is the whole trick, and it is the part everybody skips. The batter hit that hot fat and shrieked. 25 minutes later, you had a crust that cracked under a knife. 4 cents a pan in 1938 by my father's arithmetic. Then the Chelsea Milling Company over in Chelsea, Michigan, put the Jiffy corn muffin mix on the shelf in 1930 in that little blue and white box. And General Mills and the rest of them spent 40 years teaching working mothers that a box was modern and a skillet was drudgery. Nobody banned cornbread. There is no law. They just made sure your mother felt like a hick for making it the long way, and the long way is 9 minutes of work. And the fat she baked it in, that is where this gets interesting. Hold that thought. Number 23, sweet corn dried on window screens in the attic. August, when the sweet corn came in faster than anybody could eat it. She blanched it, cut it off the cob, spread it in a single layer on old window screens, and set the screens up in the attic where it was 110 degrees and the air moved. 3 days and it rattled like gravel into a flour sack, into the pantry. In January, she threw a handful in a pot with water and cream, and it came back. Not like fresh, I will not lie to you, but sweeter and cornier than anything in a can, because drying concentrates sugar instead of leaching it. It cost her the screens and the attic. Then Green Giant, out of Le Sueur, Minnesota, and Del Monte took the canned vegetable aisle in the 20s and 30s, and the attic screens went out to the burn pile. Here is the one part you do not skip. It has to dry fast, in real moving air. Slow drying in a humid room grows mold, and moldy corn is not a thing you gamble with. Fast air, thin layer, or do not bother. That is what she dried. The next one is what she buried, number 22. Eggs put down in lime water in the cellar. Pickling lime, calcium hydroxide, the gray powder, an ounce of it stirred into a quart of cool boiled water, in a stoneware crock down the cellar steps where it stayed 40 degrees all year. In May and June, when the hens laid far more than 6 kids could eat, the extra eggs went in the crock unwashed, and she was still pulling them out to fry in December. The eggs cost her the corn she threw the chickens. Then Frigidaire and General Electric spent the 1940s and 50s selling the refrigerator as the modern woman's liberation. And they were not wrong about that. But the crock in the corner went from being a smart woman's pantry to being a thing you were embarrassed to have. Pastured eggs at a farmer's market this Saturday will run you $7 a dozen. Now the honest part, and this one matters. No federal agency has tested and blessed water glassing. What it depends on is the bloom, the natural coating on an egg that has never been washed, and the lime sealing the shell. So, unwashed eggs only, from a flock you know, food-grade lime, a food-grade crock. And this rule, which was my mother's rule and is still the rule, when you pull an egg out, put it in a bowl of water. If it floats, it goes to the hogs. You do not crack it to check. You do not smell it. It floats, it is gone. Now, the pot she rendered her cooking fat in. Number 21, Number 21, leaf lard rendered on butchering day. Cold Saturday in November. The leaf fat off a hog, chopped into cubes, into a cast iron kettle over low heat all day until the fat ran clear as water and the cracklings dropped to the bottom. Strained through cloth into crocks. One hog gave her cooking fat for a year in a coffee can of cracklings that were gone by Tuesday. Cost her a Saturday. Then in 1911, Procter & Gamble down in Cincinnati put Crisco on the shelf and spent the next 60 years running advertising that told American housewives that their mother's kitchen fat would stop their hearts. Here is where the record turned. Lard is roughly 40% saturated fat, butter is roughly 63%, and the biggest single fatty acid in lard is oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat everyone praises olive oil for. That is not a fringe claim, that is a fat profile, and anybody can look it up. A jar of heritage rendered lard at a specialty grocery now costs $16. Nobody banned the pot on her stove. They just made sure she felt like a fool for using it. First pattern break. Stop and notice something. Every one of these so far, every single one, was not killed by a law and was not killed by a health scare. It was killed by a product. Something on a shelf with a marketing budget behind it, sold to a woman who was tired. That is worth holding on to, because in about 10 minutes that stops being true and it gets worse. Keep counting. Number 20, fried mush. Cornmeal porridge cooked thick the night before and poured warm into a bread pan. In the morning it had set like a brick. She sliced it a half-inch thick, cold, and fried the slices in bacon grease until the outside crackled and the middle went soft as custard. Sorghum over the top, breakfast for 8 for the price of a cup of meal. Then in 1906, up in Battle Creek, Michigan, the Kellogg Company put corn flakes on the market, and inside of 30 years, the American breakfast belonged to a cardboard box. Whole grain cornmeal, cooked and cooled, gives you more fiber and a slower blood sugar response than any flaked cereal in that aisle. That is not controversial. It is the same reason cold potatoes behave differently than hot ones. The starch changes when it sets, and there is an older piece of this most people never hear. Corn treated with lime, nixtamalized the way the people who first grew it did it, releases niacin the body can actually use. When the American South ate cornmeal without it, they got pellagra by the 100,000. That is the kind of thing the old kitchens knew in their hands and could not explain, and the science came along behind them. The mush stayed the same. The kitchen just quit making it. The next one saved the sick and now costs $9 in a paper cup. Number 19, the stock pot on the back of the range. A ham bone she was going to throw out anyway, cold water, an onion, a bay leaf, and set on the coolest corner of the range to barely move for 2 days. She strained it into jars. That stock started every soup, every pot of beans, every mess of noodles for a week. It cost her the wood, and she was burning the wood anyway. Then bouillon cubes and box stock took the shelf, and grandmother stopped saving bones. Now, I am going to be square with you, because bone broth got oversold in the last 10 years, and I am not going to add to it. It is not medicine. It will not fix your joints. What is not in dispute is that a long simmer pulls gelatin and minerals out of bone and connective tissue in a way a bouillon cube cannot, because a bouillon cube is salt and flavoring. And the price difference is not close to close. A grocery in Chicago will sell you a $9 cup of what she made out of garbage. Nobody stopped you from saving that bone, they just kept you busy enough to throw it out. Number 18, hard tack and journey bread. Flour, water, salt, rolled thin, docked with a fork, baked low and slow until it went hard as a roof shingle. Kept in a tin, it lasted a year, and the mice could not get into it either. This is how families crossed Iowa in a wagon. This is what a Union soldier ate every single day of that war. And here is where I am going to disappoint you on purpose, folks. There is no modern vindication for hardtack, no study, no comeback. It is not good. It was never good. Half the men who ate it soaked it in coffee to keep from breaking a tooth on it. It is on this list for one reason: it kept, it traveled, it cost almost nothing, and it fed the people who built the country you live in. Sometimes that is the whole story, and there is no twist at the end. If everything on a list like this comes out to a triumph, somebody is lying to you. The next one is where it gets interesting again. Number 17, Sunday chicken and noodles. An old hen past laying killed Saturday afternoon. Simmered Sunday morning with an onion and salt until the meat fell off. Then the noodles, flour, egg yolks, a little of the fat off the top of the broth. Rolled out on the kitchen table so thin you could see the wood grain through it, cut into ribbons with a knife, and hung over the back of a chair to dry while we were at church. Straight into the boiling broth when we got home. 20 minutes and it fed 12. Then in 1953, Swanson, out of Omaha, Nebraska, 300 miles west of us, launched the frozen dinner on the aluminum tray, 49 cents, and spent 20 years telling the American housewife that Sunday cooking was a burden and that the men who sold trays would carry it for her. Every blind taste test anybody has ever run on scratch noodles against a frozen or packaged replacement has gone the same direction, and you do not need a panel of judges to tell you why. Egg yolks and time. She was not burdened, she was feeding people. There is a difference, and it matters. The next one is the one I warned you about. Brace up. Number 16, head cheese. I am going to be straight with you. Nobody ate head cheese because it was delicious. When they killed the hog in November, they used every part of it because you had one hog and a winter in front of you, and the arithmetic did not allow for waste. The head went in the biggest pot in the house, boiled all day with vinegar, onion, sage, salt, and pepper. The meat was picked off, seasoned hard, packed into a bread pan, and the natural gelatin out of the head set it overnight into a loaf you could slice cold. It cost her nothing. It kept 2 weeks in the cold pantry. Then incomes came up, grandchildren got squeamish, and Oscar Mayer over in Madison, Wisconsin filled the lunch meat case with something pink and uniform in a plastic sleeve, and head cheese was buried by 1970. A shop in Brooklyn will sell you the identical thing today called terrine for $18 a slice. My father's line about it was not sentimental. He said, "You do not waste an animal that died to feed you." That was not poetry. That was the arithmetic of a farm with one hog on it. That is the grim one. The next one was the joy. Second pattern break. Look at the pattern now. Every single thing on this list, they told us, was poor food, backward food. Farm food, said the way people say it when they mean something else. And it is the exact same food the most expensive restaurants in this country now charge $20 a plate for and call heritage. That is not a coincidence, folks. That is a market discovering what it threw away. Number 15, apple butter in a copper kettle behind the machine shed. 15 bushels of windfall apples out of the orchard, cored and quartered, cooked down with cider and a scant amount of sugar in a copper kettle over a fire out behind the shed. It had to be stirred without stopping for 8 hours, or it scorched, and once it scorched, the whole batch was ruined and everybody knew whose fault it was. Neighbors took turns on the paddle. It made 24 jars, dark as a plowed field, thick enough to stand a spoon in. I was 11 years old the first year they let me take the paddle. My father went to get more wood and left me on it for what he said would be 5 minutes. There was a hawk working the fence line and I watched it. I do not know how long. When he came back, he stood over that kettle a while without saying anything, which was worse than anything he could have said. And then he said, "Well, now you will remember. I have. Every October since." Then Smuckers, out of Orrville, Ohio, took the shelf, and nobody in the county stirred a kettle again. The next one is what she put up in the same jars. Number 14, dill pickles gone sour in a crock. Cucumbers packed into a 5-gallon stoneware crock with a fistful of dill heads and garlic. A brine, real brine, salt and water, no vinegar, a plate on top and a creek rock on the plate to hold everything under. 3 weeks behind the cellar door, and they came out sour and cloudy and alive. Then Vlasic, out of Detroit, and the rest of them took the pickle aisle and pasteurized everything on it, on purpose, deliberately, so the jar would sit stable on a shelf for 2 years. And that is the whole story right there. A crock pickle is fermented, which means live lactic acid bacteria. A shelf pickle is a cucumber shocked in hot vinegar and then heated until nothing in it is alive. Extension food science programs at the land-grant universities have published this for decades, and it is not disputed by anybody. They are two different foods wearing the same name. Here is the one part you do not skip. Everything stays under the brine. Anything that floats up into the air grows the wrong thing. Weight it down, keep it cool, and if it ever smells like anything other than sour pickles, it goes out. Nobody outlawed the crock. They just made sure you never learned there was a difference. Which brings us to what she did with cabbage in that same corner. Number 13, sauerkraut. 5 pounds of cabbage shredded fine, 3 tablespoons of pickling salt. She worked it with her hands in a dishpan until the cabbage wept its own water, packed it hard into the crock, weighted it under its own brine, and left it in a cool cellar for 3 to 6 weeks. That was it. That was the entire recipe, cabbage and salt and patience. A nickel of cabbage in 1936 became a gallon of sauerkraut that fed a family through February and delivered vitamin C in a month when there was not one green thing growing between here and the Missouri line. The last 15 years of gut microbiome research has been very good to that crock. Live culture fermented vegetables measurably change intestinal flora. That work has come out of Harvard, out of Stanford, out of a dozen places, and the finding keeps landing in the same spot. A 12-ounce jar of unpasteurized kraut at a natural grocery runs $12. Same rule as the pickles, and it is the only rule. Keep it under the brine, floats, and mold finds it. Stays down, and in 3 weeks it is the cheapest thing in your house worth eating. And what she used to make bread rise before yeast came in a packet. Number 12. The starter jar on the back of the range. Flour and water in a crock, fed a spoonful a day, alive with the wild yeast that lived in that kitchen's own walls. My mother had one going that came from her mother, and I could not tell you how old it actually was because that is the kind of thing nobody thinks to write down until it is gone. Then Fleischmann's put fresh yeast in a cake in 1868, and dry active yeast came through in the 1940s, and inside of one generation every kitchen in the county threw its starter out as unnecessary. Which it was. That is the honest part. Packet yeast is faster and it is more reliable. And there is a reason people took it. But the research on long fermented bread is fairly settled now. Give a dough 8 or 12 hours with wild culture instead of 90 minutes with a packet, and you get a lower glycemic response and more available minerals because the fermentation breaks down phytates that otherwise lock zinc and iron up. An artisan sourdough loaf at the co-op is $11. Her starter cost her a spoonful of flour a day. Third pattern break. Now listen close, because this is where it changes. Everything from here down, they did not just outsell her. From here down, the Food and Drug Administration, the Health Department, and the industry lobby got involved. And some of what my mother did in that kitchen you genuinely cannot do today, not because it stopped working, because the door got shut. Number 11, a pie crust made with lard, 2 cups of flour, 3/4 of a cup of her own rendered lard, cold, a pinch of salt, ice water, worked by hand only until the fat purled through the flour, rolled once, chilled, baked. It shattered like glass, and I have never once had a store crust do that. Then Crisco arrived in 1911. Then in 1961, the American Heart Association issued its guidance framing saturated animal fat as the danger, and by 1980, there was almost nobody left under 60 who could make a real crust. Then the science moved, In 2014, a large meta-analysis in the Annals of Internal Medicine went back through the accumulated evidence and reported that it did not clearly support the guidance that had been issued about saturated fat. I want to say this carefully because this is a place where people overreach. That does not mean lard is health food. It does not mean eat all you want. What it means is that the confidence was never as earned as the campaign against her kitchen was loud. 60 years of a woman being made to feel reckless over a pie crust. Nobody ever apologized. Next is where they did not just misjudge. Next is where they restricted. Number 10, clabbered milk and cottage cheese off the separator. Raw whole milk, still warm, left in a stoneware bowl under a cloth to sour naturally over 2 days into a thick clabber. Cut, warm gently, drained through a cloth bag hung off the sink. What came out was fresh tart curd she put on warm cornbread with salt and pepper. It cost her nothing. We had the cow. Then in 1987, the Food and Drug Administration's rule banning the interstate sale of raw milk for human consumption took effect. Roughly half the states now prohibit or heavily restrict retail sale within their own borders as well. That is the one I teased you about. The trick a grocery store legally cannot sell you across most state lines in this country. Now the honest hedge, and I am not going to soften it. Raw milk carries genuine microbial risk. If the animal is sick, if the equipment is dirty, if the milk is old, people get seriously ill, and children and older folks get the worst of it. That is real and documented, and I'm not going to lie to you about it to make a better video. My mother had one cow she knew, one bucket she scalded, and milk that was 2 hours old. If you do not have all three of those, do not do this. If you do, soured milk cheeses have fed people for 4,000 years without a single food company involved. And the greens she served alongside it. Number 9. Wilted greens with hot bacon dressing. First warm week of April, before anything was up in the garden, she sent us out along the fence rows with a paring knife for dandelion greens and lamb's quarters when it came and the tender leaf tops off the turnips. Washed 3 times because of the grit, then bacon out of the skillet, a splash of cider vinegar and a pinch of sugar into the hot grease, and that dressing poured over the raw greens so they wilted down in the bowl in front of you. That supper cost her the walk to the fence line. Then the American vegetable aisle collapsed in the 1960s to iceberg lettuce and a couple of other things that shipped well, and every bitter green in this country got reclassified as a weed. Look up turnip greens in the USDA nutrient database sometime. A cup of them cooked carries calcium in the neighborhood of a glass of milk and more vitamin K than nearly anything else in the produce section, and dandelion is right there with it. Nobody outlawed a dandelion. They just quit selling the plants with the most medicine in them because those plants bruise in a truck. A restaurant in Madison will charge you $19 for that bowl and call it foraged. She called it Tuesday. Next is what filled the pantry in November. Number 8, pork down in salt in the cellar. 100 pounds of pork packed in a wooden barrel with rock salt and brown sugar and enough brine to cover it, headed and set in the coldest corner of the cellar. That barrel fed 8 people through a whole winter, and there was not an electric line involved anywhere in it. Then refrigerated distribution and a meat counter in every town made a barrel in the cellar feel primitive by about 1955, and low-sodium messaging finished the job. Now here is the one part you absolutely do not skip, and I mean this one more than any other line in this video. Modern salt curing of meat requires proper curing salt containing measured sodium nitrite, the pink stuff, sold as curing salt number 1, and you follow a tested extension recipe with the weights and the times as written. That nitrite is not a corporate additive somebody snuck in on you. It is what prevents botulism in cured meat, and botulism does not announce itself. It has no smell, it has no taste. Do it by the tested guidance, and you have got something wonderful. Free-handed out of a memory of how great Grandpa did it, and you have a genuine emergency. My father used the rock salt he could get and a winter he trusted. We are not him. We have better information than he had, and it would be an insult to him not to use it. Fourth pattern break. We are into the top 7, and these last ones are different from the rest. These are not dishes. These are the load-bearing walls. Pull any one of them out, and every other trick on this list stops working, which is exactly why they went first. Number 7, the root cellar. Not a recipe. A room, a hole dug in below the frost line, 35 to 40 degrees year-round, humid enough that potatoes did not shrivel, and ventilated enough that apples did not rot the whole bin. Potatoes in a wooden bin, carrots down in damp sand, cabbages hung by the root, apples in a separate corner because apples make everything near them go over faster. She put 200 pounds of potatoes down that hole in October and pulled the last one out in April, and it cost her the digging. Then post-war suburban construction quietly deleted the cellar from the standard American house. No basement, no cellar door, no cool dark room anywhere on the property. And by 1970, the only cold storage in the average kitchen was a box you had to plug in. The land grant extension services still publish root cellar plans and storage tables, and the numbers hold up. Properly cellared root crops keep 6 to 8 months with very little nutrient loss. Nobody outlawed a hole in the ground. They just quit building houses with one, and an appliance company needed you to need the plug. The next one is what she poured over supper. Number 6, sorghum cooked off in the fall pan, caned sorghum cut in September and run through a press, and the green juice boiled down in a long flat pan over a wood fire for 8 or 9 hours until it went dark and thick, and the smell of it carried a half mile. 1 acre made 40 gallons, and a jar of it sweetened biscuits and coffee and mush for a year. It cost the labor and the fire, and everybody in the neighborhood came, and that was half the point of it. Then refined white sugar got cheap enough that by 1960, sorghum was a curiosity and the presses went to the scrapyard. There are maybe a handful of working sorghum mills left in this part of the country. Sorghum is one of the better natural sources of iron and potassium you could keep in an old pantry. It is a real mineral source, unlike white sugar, which is nothing but the sweet. A pint of the real thing at a farm store this fall runs you $22. She had a jar of it on the shelf every year of her life, and what she made with the last of the milk before it turned. Number 5, milk gravy, bacon grease left in the skillet from breakfast. A spoon of flour whisked into it and cooked until it smelled like toast. That is the part people rush, and it is why their gravy tastes like paste. Then a slow pour of whole milk, salt, and more black pepper than you think is reasonable. Cooked until it coated a spoon and poured over a torn biscuit at 4:30 in the morning before milking. In 1968, that was breakfast for 8 on a nickel of flour, a cup of milk out of the bulk tank, and the fat that was already in the pan. Then home economics quietly disappeared off the schedule in most American public schools through the 70s and 80s, and an entire generation lost a skill that takes 4 minutes and has 3 ingredients. Nobody outlawed gravy. They just quit teaching your mother, and then your mother could not teach you. And what she poured it over. Number 4, buttermilk biscuits in a hot skillet, 2 cups of flour with baking powder and salt, 4 tablespoons of cold lard cut in with 2 knives until it pearled. Cold fat always, that is the whole secret, and the second thing everybody skips. 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk, stirred in with a wooden spoon just until it barely held together, patted out with her hands, never rolled, cut with the mouth of a jelly jar because we did not own a biscuit cutter, into a hot cast iron skillet at 450 degrees for 12 minutes, shoulder to shoulder so they climbed each other, 4 cents a pan in 1938. Then Biscuit came out of General Mills in 1931, and refrigerated dough in a tube spread through American kitchens in the 50s and 60s out of Minneapolis. And by 1980, most kitchens in this country did not contain a person who could make a biscuit without a can. Every test kitchen that has run scratch buttermilk biscuits against a mix or a tube has come back the same way on rise and on flavor. That is not a surprise to anybody who has eaten both. Biscuits are 90 seconds of actual work, folks. Somebody sold you a can by convincing you they were an hour. Next is what went to the field in August. Number 3, Switchel, water, cider vinegar, fresh ginger, grated, a spoon of sorghum, stirred together in a gallon jar and set down in the milk house where it was cold. That is what went out to the field in a jug when the crew was baling in 98-degree heat. And it is what my mother sent out with us because she said plain water would give you a bellyache when you were that hot. She was not wrong, and she could not have told you why. Here is why. What she made in that jar was water, sugar, an acid, and mineral content, which is a description of every sports drink ever formulated. Gatorade came out of the University of Florida in 1965, got patented, got sold, and became a billion-dollar category. And what the sports nutrition research has confirmed over the last 20 years is exactly what the jug in the milk house was already doing. Fluid with a little sugar and a little mineral in it rehydrates a working body measurably better than plain water does. A 12-ounce bottle of artisan Switchel at a farmer's market this July runs $6. She kept a gallon in a stoneware jug for about a nickel, and there were 4 of us drinking out of it either. And number 2 is where a whole winter got stored. Number 2, home canning done right. Jars out of Muncie, Indiana, Ball, and there is not a farm kitchen in the Midwest that did not have a case of them. New lids every year, no exceptions. Boiling water bath for the high acid things, pressure canner for everything else. She put up green beans, tomatoes, corn, peaches, beets, and chow chow every August in a kitchen that ran 104 degrees with the range going. And by October, the shelf under the stairs held 200 jars glowing red and green and gold. That shelf fed us from November to May. It cost her the jars, the lids, and the salt. Then Del Monte and Campbell's owned the shelf. Home canning shrank to a hobby, and by 2000, most households in this country did not own a canner. Here is the one part you do not skip, and it is the last safety line I will give you, so hear it. Low acid foods, green beans, corn, meat, anything that is not tomatoes or fruit or pickles must be pressure canned. Not water bath, not a recipe off a card, not the way great aunt somebody did it in 1948 and everybody lived. The USDA and the National Center for Home Food Preservation published tested current recipes for every single thing my mother put up, free, and you can pull them up on a phone in the kitchen. She used the guidance she had. We have better. Use it, and your pantry will outlive the power grid. Which brings us to number 1, and number 1, the self-fed table. Number 1 is not a recipe, folks. Number 1 is the whole thing at once. Number 1 is a woman in a farmhouse in eastern Iowa in February of 1968, feeding 11 people out of a green enamel pot of beans, a skillet of cornbread, a crock of eggs and lime water, a crock of kraut behind the cellar door, a barrel of pork, a bin of potatoes she dug herself, a sack of dried corn out of the attic, a jar of lard, a starter on the back of the range, 200 jars under the stairs, and a head that held every bit of it without one card written down. Number 1 is the entire competence of feeding a family without needing a store, without needing a company, and without needing anybody's permission. She was not poor. I want to be clear about that because the word people reach for is always the wrong one. She was fed, she was free, and she was beholden to nobody. That is what got taken, not one dish, all of it at once. And here is the part that sits in my chest. She raised 6 of us in that kitchen, and every one of us lived, and I could not make 11 of those 25 things today without looking something up. She was standing right there. I was 11 years old with a paddle in my hand, and I could have asked her anything. That is not forgetting. That is a transfer that got interrupted on purpose by people who profited from the interruption and who ran the numbers first. They did not take a recipe out of your family. They took the handing down. They took the moment a mother puts a spoon in a kid's hand and says, "This is how we keep ourselves." That is what we are pulling back, one plate at a time. Let me be square with you before we close out. This is not collapse talk. I am not selling you fear, and I do not want you afraid of the grocery store, and I am not your doctor. 3 or 4 things on this list carry real risk, and I told you exactly where every one of those lines is. Everything else on that list you could do this Saturday with what is already in your kitchen. So here's what I want you to do this week. Pick one, just one. Do not try to become your grandmother by Sunday. You will quit by Wednesday and feel worse than when you started. Saturday morning, put a pound of navy beans on with a ham hock. Saturday evening, bake 1 pan of cornbread in a cast iron skillet you got hot first. And starting tomorrow, pour the bacon grease off breakfast into a can and keep it by the stove. That is 3 plates on the table, 3 tricks back in your hands, and it will cost you under $6. I put up 11 quarts of apple butter this last October, the way my father ran that kettle behind the machine shed, and it cost me the sugar and 1 afternoon on the paddle. Fed me clear through winter, and I did not scorch it this time. That is how the old folks did it. That is still how it is done in any farm kitchen that remembers. Now tell me down below, did your mother or your grandmother make any of these? Which one? What did she cook that nobody in your family makes anymore? Tell me the name of the dish and tell me her name. I want the name. I read every one of them, and the one that gets asked for most is the one I make next. She was not backward, folks. She was fed, and she fed you. Somebody just did not get the chance to hand her kitchen down. It is yours again. Take it. Next time I am counting down the kitchen tricks my mother kept in her head that never made it onto a recipe card. 25 of them, the small ones, the ones that were never written anywhere because she never thought they were worth writing. One of them will save you from throwing out a batch of anything ever again. Subscribe if you have not yet. We are pulling this table back, 1 plate at a time.